first thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if Aleem has ever heard of it, there's some shit called a humanzee. Have you ever heard of the humanzee?
Mandy?
No, humanzee.
I'm not sure, no.
Let me tell you, this is the funniest shit ever. You know what I'm saying? They tell on themselves. I'm watching Jesse the Body Ventura, who became the governor, who is now a conspiracy theorist. And conspiracy theories, even though we should be into it, we should be aware of it, but they're more the white man's civil rights. For white folks, conspiracy theories is actually what's enlightening them, even more than their fake pretending to be New Age. Conspiracy theories are because it always they have nothing else, so it comes down to what's breaking their constitutional rights. So they have a show on True TV, Jesse the Body Ventura, ex-governor, all these conspiracies. And he's putting down real live conspiracies, the towers and chemtrails, and he talks about the making of motherfucking humanzees. Humanzees are humans that are crossbred with chimpanzees. Humanzees.
Wow.
Now you can go on YouTube and find Jesse Ventura Humanzees, and you'll hear the show for itself. But what's funny about this is as he's going on and talking about the plot, the goal of Humanzees, he just described the entire creation of the white race. It's so in your face. Now, he talks about how they're breeding this race, they're crossbreeding them, and these monkeys will take over. Now, of course, this is the Planet of the Apes story. And he goes into detail about the testing facility. In the latest Planet of the Apes, that where they were doing the testing on the monkeys. He's saying this place is real. The place is called Yerkes, I think, or Yerkes or something like that. It used to be in Florida. Now it's out here in Georgia. And in there, they're making real humanzees. The idea is that same old conspiracy. They're creating a super army. They're going to take over the world. But what's going to happen is these humanzees are going to get out and eventually take over the world. I'm like, well, this shit already happened. You know what I'm saying? Yakub has made the original white humanzee on an island of Patmos, and he got out and took over the world. They're describing their entire story to a T. That's how you know this shit happened. So if people don't know, you can get the book, Making of White Man History, Traditions, and Teachings by Elijah Muhammad. I know there's another brother who did one, too. That's a good one that gives you the story, this story of the creation of the white man. Now, everything else kind of lines up with the story, but there's no, you can say, more than hard evidence. And the evidence that Elijah Muhammad gives, of course, people are going to say that this is something from a racist standpoint. But if you listen to white people themselves, when they talk about humans come from monkeys, they're talking about themselves. We don't come from monkeys. They're talking about the Yeti, the Bigfoot, and the abominable snowman. That's all their origins. Those are the original humanzees that eventually came as what we know as white folks today. So they're doing this same experiment too. Now, we also know that genetic tampering, genetic programming is not a new thing, even though they're presenting it as something that's new. That's how we created them. So when they're talking about these humanzees, it's just nothing but history repeating itself. Now, in the 60s, they had a guy, a monkey, that they found that was odd, which you can find online, called Oliver. Look for a YouTube. You could Google Oliver the Humanzee, but look for a particular YouTube video, Oliver the Chimp, because that's a little bit thorough. They show you all the oddities of this chimp. First and foremost, that he used to walk upright. Now, a regular chimp, we've seen that in movies. Chimps walk upright. When they walk upright, they're bow-legged, and they'll tell you they can only walk for a certain amount of time. Oliver spent his entire life walking upright with his back straight and his legs straight. That's never been seen before. They talk about Oliver's nose protruding, his ears are different and human-like. He doesn't get along with other apes. He smells different from other apes. He enjoys whiskey and a good cigar while watching TV. And they show you all of this. This is no mystery. They show you his whole phenomenon. They eventually, his trainers who had him, who eventually sold him to a lawyer, where they did all this genetic testing. They found a little bit when they was testing him genetically. Genetic testing was in its infancy, and so they couldn't really come up with nothing more than the fact that his chromosomes, one side was monkey and the other side was not monkey, but they couldn't come up with a definitive saying he was human in terms of the chromosome count. But as you hear in the documentary, people talking, like, they know he's human, and they couldn't figure this shit out with an offspring because he was attracted to women. So he was trying to fuck the trainer, his lady. He was getting real aggressive. He said the nigga walked in the house and just threw her down, tried to hit her with a doggy style. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was on this shit. So they're showing you a straight live humanity. You can see this shit right now. So we need to understand, if you was on the fence about the making of the white man, watch that Jesse Ventura documentary and study a little bit more about Oliver, and they're telling you to your face their origin because they're doing it again. Mm-hmm. They're playing around with it again. They also go into, you also go find a documentary where Stalin in Germany was making humanities too, as a part of the concept of the super race they were making, because the idea is that the ape will be stronger and more savage-like if they can control it. So and more dispensable as an army. And I've even heard tales that we've created white people as slaves, and or for slaves originally. I mean, that's just another one of the stories that I've heard, which is another way of saying that is what they're trying to say now, that they are also creating these white people as slaves, these experiments. And so it's real interesting, but if you watch it for the subtleties and what they're actually saying, they're actually telling they're retelling their origins, which they've tried to hide so well. The only place you find most of that information is from Elijah Muhammad, which people try to dismiss it and say it was just some black Muslim stuff. But everything else lines up. All this caveman shit that they yes, sir.
Right, I was saying that was the episode that was called Manimal, something like that.
Yeah, and there's a Manimal. They also call it Manimal. Something with the chimp human thing too. But the most popular name is Humanzee. But Manimal, Manimal as well. They do refer to it as a Manimal. But absolutely. Right. And if you hear just the goals and the ideas of why they're saying they're doing it, and you line it up with the Elijah Muhammad story, it mirrors each other. It mirrors as something that already happened. They're going to get out and take over the world. Well, that shit happened. You get what I'm saying? That happened, and now it got me to watching all the Planet of the Apes again, which originally was always taught. There was no filter on that, besides that they changed the characters to white folk, but it was about the black people representing humanity and the apes represented the white man. And you really could see it in the weakest one that Tim Burton did with Marky Mark, where they refer to house humans. They refer to them as slaves. They did this, in every slave movie where you see white people sitting around the table debating if black people have souls. They did that same thing in this movie. I watched this last night, and they showed you that humanity was the black man, and this is pretty much what happened. That's what we're on now. We're on the fucking Planet of the Apes. You know what I'm saying? You damn filthy apes. Each time I go to the store, you see white people, it's like, this is a madhouse, you damn dirty apes. And then And then in the latest one, which was the most scientific, which in June they're going to do a part 2 to the latest one, which was of course the best one, the most updated, with Caesar and him being the king. Somewhere along the line, I did a breakdown of it. His eyes turning green, which was the green of Thoth. There was just so much. He had a scar on his heart, which was the scar of Hanuman. They chose to use an Indian woman, which represented Sita, if I remember. But there was like at least 10 other things I went through at the time that movie was out about him being a king. Now, they have a new one called Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Now, I think even Jesse the Ventura talked about this movie was a code because they showed them in the lab experimenting on these apes, which are actually humanzees that they're doing now at the Zerke Institute in Georgia. And then he goes through all the paperwork and all the check with this guy and this source and that source. But like I said, more than all of that, what you hear is the Yakubs story being replayed over. And that's the most important thing because people are still on the fence about this. I don't see how, but still on the fence about this Yakubs story. And you can see it as plain as day being played out yet again. So that's real interesting. I think you should check that out.
There are a bunch of cross-species hybrids out there. Mules, ligers, zebroids, beefalo. We recently discussed the majestic growler bear. But we tend to think of humans on a different level from that. We're human. There's no species even close to us. How could we possibly interbreed with something also blech? But guess what? It's been done. And some say it could be done again. It's been done because we all have a little bit of Neanderthal in us, as we've discussed previously on SciShow. The average European is 1 to 4% Neanderthal, so in effect, we are all interspecies hybrids, though that DNA has become so ingrained in our species that basically it's part of what makes us human. But the more frightening and fascinating question to ask is, could it happen again? Many have asked, and some have even had the urge to try to discover whether it is possible to interbreed humans and our nearest genetic relatives, chimpanzees. Now, before we proceed any further, let's be clear that the official position of SciShow, and hopefully of humanity, is that this is a terrible idea. It is deeply immoral. The creation of a potentially sentient organism, likely with many genetic disorders, who is the only member of his or her species, so that we could study it for science, is bad and wrong and pretty much the definition of evil. But it is nonetheless a fascinating thing to discuss, as long as we're not actually thinking about doing it. So, first, is it possible? Well, humans and chimps do share a lot of DNA. They do have one more pair of chromosomes than humans, but different numbers of chromosomes isn't an absolute barrier to interbreeding. In fact, there are some species where individuals within that species have different numbers of chromosomes and they manage just fine, a condition known as chromosomal polymorphism. In fact, in 2010, a perfectly normal, fertile Chinese man was discovered to have only 22 chromosome pairs. In the end, the genetic difference between a human and a chimpanzee is roughly the same as the genetic difference between a horse and a zebra, and zebra-horse hybrids happen all the time. A quick note on terminology here: when geneticists create these name mashups, which they actually do for hybrid animals, they put the father first in the portmanteau and the mother second. So if it's a male chimpanzee and a female human, that's a chuman, and if it's a male human and a female chimpanzee, that's a humanzee or a manpansy. Yeah, manpansy. In 2006, genetic research suggested that after the last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees, which lived between 5 and 7 million years ago, there was interbreeding between the human and chimpanzee lineages for 1.2 million years. That's not that surprising, since those lineages would likely have been very similar and living in the same geographies, but it was a bit of a shock to paleoanthropologists when the news broke. There's no evidence, however, of recent human-chimpanzee hybrids, though not for lack of trying. In the 1920s, a Soviet biologist, Ilya Ivanov, implanted his own sperm into a number of apes, including chimpanzees and orangutans. Even more creepily, he attempted to inseminate human volunteers with ape semen.
Igor Burstev is a Russian historian and an expert on the mysterious hair-covered woman named Zena.
He lives in the 1860s till 1890. Which is very interesting. Wild, human-like creature.
Local hunters went looking for the strange soul who haunted their region. This recreation is true to Abenu descriptions, though, as we will see, Zena may have looked much more human. Soon, the hunters found what they were looking for. She was eventually sold to a local man of means named Ganaba.
She was very big. They say that she was about 2 meters high. That means about maybe 7 feet. And also she was very strong. She preferred raw meat. She refused of the clothes. That is why she was always nude, though covered with her hair. Her style of life was very wild, as animal life. She was just a big wild woman.
After being caged for several years, Zena grew docile and submitted to a near domesticated life. Although she never spoke more than a couple of words, she roamed about the village freely and even worked at Ganaba's mill.
He tried to use her to carry big sacks with grain to the mill and with the wheat out of the mill, some about 100 pounds. She was taking just very easily.
And here is where the story takes another unlikely turn. Legend has it that Zena had several offspring with numerous different men from the village. Zena's first child died when she bathed it in the cold river. After that, the local village women raised her remaining 4 children who were seemingly human and of normal intelligence. One son, named Quit, was said to be very strong, ill-tempered, and quick to fight.
Now for a discovery which may surprise you. Scientists have found that most of us still have a little bit of a Neanderthal inside us. A study into the DNA of the human subspecies found that they interbred with modern humans tens of thousands of years ago, and their genetic mark remains today. The BBC's Palab Ghosh has more on these extraordinary findings.
This is a skull of a modern human, and this is from a Neanderthal. Look closely and you can see that this one has a slightly longer brain case. Most scientists believe that these are 2 separate species, and there wasn't much interaction between the 2. But now we know there was interbreeding, and that all non-Africans living today are part Neanderthal. The researchers extracted DNA from Neanderthal fossils and compared it with that taken from people living today. They found that the DNA of Europeans and Asians is 2% Neanderthal.
It's a very exciting discovery because it gives us really the first strong evidence that there was interbreeding with people like the Neanderthals. And it means that modern humans in different parts of the world may have slightly different mixes.
Doctor, I'd like to kiss you goodbye.
All right, but you're so damned ugly.
In December of 2005, a fairly innocuous open editorial article appeared in the New York Times by animal psychologist Clive Wynne, commenting on ape-human crossbreeding experiments conducted in Russia in the 1920s.
I would say that one can speak of the 1920s as the golden age of Soviet science. Anything was possible.
The story was quickly picked up by Russian and European papers, introducing even more explosive information. An article in the Scotsman newspaper stated that in 1926, the Politburo in Moscow passed a request to the Academy of Science with the order to build a living war machine. A new, invincible human being, insensitive to pain, resistant and indifferent about the quality of food they eat.
And they screamed at me, letting me know they were about to attack and coordinate their attack.
Fields was apparently spending too much time and attention on one group of chimps, likely making another group jealous.
And Peace stepped in, took my side.
Fields and Peace directly challenged the oncoming chimps, and the attackers broke off the assault. But why do chimps attack? Experts say that, as with humans, the reasons vary.
If you force the baby because you're stronger, then when the baby grows up, the baby will force you to do what it wants.
And they defend their territory. And part of defending their territory is defending the resources.
They fight because the males are concerned that if these other males get to the females, they will probably kill the offspring.
The reality is, apes and people are much more alike than even scientists expected.
It's called a rape of the Nile. And they tell you all the thousands of things that they pull out of this place. Fabian, the rape of the Nile, if you want to write that down. Anyway, he goes in, and then there's a big rush because they got all this stuff out here, but they don't know what it says and they don't know what it means because nobody can read meta-nature or hieroglyphics. So we get Champollion, comes along, him, and he's from France. He's got another guy, I think he's from England or Germany. And they got this big race on who's going to be the first to translate hieroglyphics or meta-nature. Anyway, it takes Champollion 16 years to do this. And in 1924, he translates the meta-nature and all this, and then you have the next era where people have to learn it, and then you get the birth of Egyptology, where you have Gerald Massey would be his own Egyptology, but you have people like Budge, you'd have people like Birch, and Gaston Maspero from France, and all this was to come later. But the key point is Champollion translate these hieroglyphics. As soon as he translates these hieroglyphics, he goes, heads straight to Kemet, the same year, heads straight to Africa, Kemet, to excavate all of what he has found out how to read. And he goes to the temple of Seti I and the temple of Biblium el Manuk, which is the tombs of Ramesses V. The temple of Seti I is the temple of Ramesses I, built by Ramesses II when he was like 21 years old. His father dies and he goes and builds his temple. It's in Abydos, the first Holy Land. If you didn't know there was more than one Holy Land, this is in Abydos, the first Holy Land. And we have the temple of Seti I. Now, what's interesting about this temple is, I got a picture of this temple from the 19th century, which is a nice temple with columns and all of this on it. And by the time I get another temple from 1989, the temple is totally different. It's like these white boys then went in and reconstructed the temple, tore it down and built it back up. We know why they did that. Because in this, he finds out that he has in this temple, and I want to get this picture. In this temple, he finds out that there's 4 men. And it's in the first piece you have on Egypt, if you want to look at that. There's 4 men in this temple. And I got a picture of these men, if I can find it. But anyway, those 4 men are called the Nazi, which is the Southern Africa, or the West Africa. The Himu, which is the Semitic. The Ruti, or the Root race, which is your East African, which is the Egyptians, or the Kemites. And then you have the Tamahu. Now, if you notice in that document, they don't talk about no other races. They just tell you what their names are, what they are known as, and where they're from. What type of ethnic background are they from, whatever. But the only one that they talk about in there is what? The Tamahu, which Tama meaning created, Hu meaning white, light, or bright. It means the created white people. Now, at the bottom of that, you'll find out that he says the Nazi and the Ruti, which is the West African, or the East African, created the Tamahu. Now, here we have first-hand archaeological evidence. You see, Champollion later dies, and you can get a part of this book, if you read this book, starting from chapter 3 on into chapter 10. Diop talks about it, but Diop doesn't allude to it. He just said that Champollion is very disgusted with what he finds in this tomb. It really bothers him because whatever it is, his people are known as savages. And it really bothers him. To get the book, he goes into it. This is Diop, African Origins of Civilization, Myth, or Reality. And he goes into this thing, and you can get it from chapter 3 into chapter 10. But he says that the Nazi and the Ruchi, or the root, created the Tamahu. Very interesting, because we're talking about basically the Africans, the black man created this mutated, grafted white man. Now, it's interesting about Diop. Diop explains it, and he puts it in there for further study of who picks it up. But remember, he's married to the beast. So therefore, he does not go out and just all out say. He could say it. Now, we know this man is graphic enough to kill the white scholarship in the Western civilization. But yet, he holds back on this pertinent piece, because if we know he's created by us, then we know that he's not human, because hue means color. And we need to check the origin of these words. But so he has problems with that. So he goes and conjures up this whole other theory, too great a theory or whatever, of the white man being mutated in the Ice Age. Well, if he's mutated in the Ice Age, that's funny, just like Gloria P. said. Now, here's a black man that travels up to Europe, mutates in the Ice Age. And yet we got some people that's of a lighter hue, which is still an original people. What you say, these are the real people that adapted by climates, or the other people you see around the world, not the white man. They go up, an Indian type that's coming from the Bering Straits, from Australia one time, coming and mutating in China to what you have your Chinese type or your Asian type, coming over the Bering Straits, coming into America, populating America. This is your Indian. Another group of Asians come in, populate with them, and this is how you get your Indian people. At first it was an Australoid type people, more on your Australian type. The Australoid. Then you have another type that mutates into China, comes into America, populate with them, and this is how you get this whole American Indian, indigenous American, because Indian is for India. We all understand that. But here's a people that's an indigenous American, goes up into Alaska and makes a culture and ain't mutated yet in Alaska. And here's some people that don't mutate in the ice or whatever you want in Alaska, but yet we got a blue-black African who did live all around the world. We got a blue-black crusty African, blue-black. Gods at the time, because all pineal glands is open, we'll get into that. Gods at the time go up into Europe and can't take the ice and mutate. But yet we have this person in Alaska that not only makes a culture out of it. Not only does he live in the ice, he makes a culture. You understand? But yet we have the black African, who is the personification of culture. Go up in the Ice Age and we come out with this beast. It don't go that way. The world don't go that way. You see, that's what we're going to prove here today. But anyway, he had to conjure up this because, number one, he's trained by the white man. He's in the white man schools, because we understand all the schools in Africa, the chancellors and all of the system that they're under are either under French system or under the British system or under some type of Islamic system, white Arab system. So therefore, if they write some stuff that's going to pass to be printed in books, that's going to be passed as scholarship, then all the time when they do this, they got to work this stuff in so it's pleasable to the white man. But we know this is not to be the case, because he knew in his Tamahu story, he knew enough about this. And even in the end of the chapters, you just got to have to study this book because I can't point out where it is. In the chapters, he says that he has read Champollion's, I think it's 13 letters he writes back to Champollion, his elder brother, before he dies, explaining all of this stuff about this mutation of a man he's known, and obviously they explained in the temples what this person really was, and he was very upset about it. Diop reads these so-called, they call them the bas reliefs of Biblium El Muluk and Temple of Seti I. He reads these things, and that means that he knows everything there is to know about this stuff. Because it's funny, because in another part, we have them, Libya. Libya, at an early age, if you trace the culture, it's only populated by the so-called Tamahu. I said, now that's strange. That means that it was populated by the Tamahu who had an early culture, but yet the white man mutates up here. here and is in barbarism, but he has enough sense to come down in his barbaric state and take over some black people. It don't make no sense. Then we understand that we have in Kemet with Menes, or normal as some people say, goes in and he has to liberate upper and lower Kemet from a barbarian, mainly these Tamahu. You see, it's a lot of holes that's missing in the history, and a lot of people are confused about this stuff. You see, did the white man come and see? Was the white man in the caves, caves and hills of Europe as a barbarian? Then what is this man doing down here, fighting? Now you have if you can get the papyrus, you can get it out of the book, Ewalish Budge's book, From Fetish to God in Ancient Egypt. Budge's book, awesome piece of work. All black people should have that if you want to know some stuff about Egyptian mythology, as well as the massive stuff. It's only $9. You can get it at the Sphinx, or you can order it. In that book, there's that papyrus, the wars, I think it's called...
Ivanov was right on at least one count. Chimpanzees are almost 99% genetically identical to man, and would be the best animal to try to breed with humans. Experts believe that man evolved from the same evolutionary branch as chimpanzees. Gorillas and orangutans evolved along a different branch, making interbreeding between chimps and people the most likely.
The of today is actually someone that I refer to as the Neo-Neanderthal, or who he's now calling himself Humanithal or Humanthal. He's now actually adopting a euphemism around what we've been speaking about, and of course what it is that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had spoken to us about, and the myth of Yakub and the whole 9 yards. And a lot of people, a lot of my students who had viewed that videotape of the tape I did where I showed that the sons of Esau and Japheth, those who are breaking down the codes of the Bible and so forth, coming up and speaking to the fact that I believe it's Genesis 25 and 25 when they speak about Rebecca having a child, and the first one who came out who was supposed to serve the younger, the older one serving the younger. The first one who came out was red, and his whole body was a hairy garment. In other words, he was covered with hair. So you figure that the redhead, essentially the red-headed entity, straight-haired entity, was exactly what it is that the scientists today are now classifying as the Neanderthal. So there are stories that are in the Bible that are justifying the fact that there may have been two creations. He is now, of course, justifying his humanity by putting all kinds of information out that has nothing to do with science. It has more to do with his pseudoscience that he is trying to fit into a puzzle that he has created based upon his sciences of anthropology and archaeology. So there are certain things that he is now saying that doesn't seem to make sense. For instance, in dealing with his marked inferiority complex of what it is that he's now found out about his genetics. Of course, studying the human genetics now has made it even more difficult for him to justify his existence. Of course, you know that the rape and the digging up of Africa, the desecration of tombs of our ancestors, and the breaking up of tribes, and the destruction, the complete and wanton destruction of historical information as well as historical monuments and so forth, would mean nothing to him at this point because of what I have come to understand as the empathetic disconnect that the Neanderthal has for the true man being, because basically there are no genetics linking him to the true man. And so therefore we now have to deal with his abandonment issues, or at least his amnesiac issues of not knowing where he originates from. So as I'm saying in the new upcoming Hidden Colors, that the deeper the white anthropologist digs the earth and in Africa and all places where indigenous peoples live, the blacker the planet becomes. Everywhere he goes for any evidence of his existence, he keeps digging up black artifacts, black remnants of the fact that this was a black planet. Now he has taken his own archaeology or archaeological tenets and archaeological practice, began digging into the DNA, into the tombs, or into the parts of the human body that have within it buried certain scientific evidence as to who the true humanity was on this planet. And now that he has dug and found no connection to who he said were the original peoples in Africa, his entire science said that all life began in Africa. That being the case, how come there are no pieces of evidence in his own genetics to connect him to the sub-Saharan peoples that he knows to be the original peoples of Africa? So what I have been saying for the longest is that the disconnect and the ability for him to keep his wanton savagery and disconnect from the feelings and from the sufferings of African people is because he no longer, or pretty much does not, or ever had any connections to the true man being, which is the true human being on this planet.
I mean, that definitely correlates to the information I've been studying too. I mean, if your heritage is non-African, then you are part Neanderthal, according to the new studies in the July issue of the Molecular Biology and Evolution. Discovery News has also reported on this Neanderthal and so-called human interbreeding for some time. But like you said, if it was humans in which that interbreed with Neanderthal, then they would have African a connection. But since they don't, then they're lying about the research in which that they've been to, in which that they are even coming out saying. And they are still trying to say that the Neanderthal man came from out of Africa about 30,000 years ago.
Yeah. He is trying to connect himself to what it is that everywhere on the planet shows to be human. He does not have that connection. Everything he has been based on his conquest and absorption of cultures and complete destruction and estrangement and separation of those peoples from the culture that he has now absorbed. It's interesting, a incredible author named Franz Fallon stated in one of his works about the Europeans' mindset is that when he had conquered, destroyed African civilizations, he began to turn them psychologically into what became known by Freud, or with Freud, as the other. The other is this beast that the European believes lives on the borders of his civilization, and that the borders of civilization essentially is representative of everything that is not him. So when he conquered, he not only took the land, but he took everything that was on the land as well as was within the people themselves. So he stole culture, he stole science, he stole everything, absorbed it, became it, and actually in his own psychosis believed that it belonged to him. Because based on the fact that he was superior and actually conquered these people, then he had a right to their mindset, and that they no longer have a right to their own psychology and mindset, that it now belongs to me. It's the Elvis syndrome. So that particular mentality now is now playing itself into the way the European is now legitimizing his excursion into recolonizing Africa. He is stating now that according to the genetics that we have that they have now discovered, if you have any traces of Neanderthal, it would not make you an African anymore. So now what he's now saying is that if the Africans who, quote-unquote, migrated out of Africa, interbred with the Neanderthals and then reintegrated back into Africa, it means that they're not Africans. Therefore, they can lay claim to the territories based upon that type of indigenous kind of parasitic hitching a ride genetically into Africa, the same way that they're claiming to be so-called Native Americans over here, and they're pale white. This is the kind of interface. But the thing I want to get our brothers and sisters to realize is show them that everywhere that you are looking at this point, when you're looking at the so-called Alpha European, the one that is now shown to be the higher order of human being, the ones that they show you in their anthropology when they show you the monkey and then the gradation and the evolution of humanity from the monkey, you don't ever see Africans standing right behind the white man. It goes straight from monkey to white man. Therefore, he does not include us in whatever he calls his evolutionary strain. But you can see that the Neanderthal, which now he has embraced because of his genome project, is now discovering that he is a Neanderthal. At least 4 to 10% of the Neanderthal strain is in what they call the new Homo sapien, or the new human being, him calling himself human now that he's interfaced with that genetic, with those genetics. If you can look at the so-called higher order, or the European, the Caucasoid, who is now so-called ruling the planet, he is pale almost to the point of being sheet white and with red hair. Therefore, all indications of the Neanderthal, which I was speaking years ago about, that the Neanderthal still is, or the Neo-Neanderthal is the ruler, so-called, of the planet now, or has now conquered based on that rulership. You can see that the ruling hierarchy are all redheads. You could look at the Prince, what's his name? Not Andrew, but his brother. You can look at all the movies you see out today, the TV. There's always these redhead white women that they're promoting, redhead in all your commercials. Open your eyes. Take a deeper look at who it is that they're promoting to you as the alpha human being. And it is most assuredly and invariably in the main red-headed and pale. So now you're watching the Neo-Neanderthal essentially trying to invest into your psyche who it is that you need to emulate and who it is that now rules the planet.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. When you're looking at the Neanderthal, I know that I've read articles about them being cannibalistic. And if you're talking about 4 to 10% of that is within their genetic strand, even today, you know, I mean, where does that stand at as far as the current information that we've been talking about? I know that it's been all over the place about the blood sacrificing and so forth and so on.
Yeah, anything that has to do with red is essentially what they are dealing with now. Blood sacrifices being just one of them, being the symbology. Looking at anything red, you look at Rothschild, the Red Shield. Rothschild pretty much runs the banking system for the entire planet now. Estimated a worth at $800 trillion. If you look at the new movies that are coming out, all the superheroes now, if you're looking at children's movies coming out of children's cartoons coming out of Japan with the hentais and all the rest of these cartoons, there are all these red-headed, white and pale Neanderthal throwbacks to what they call the superior human. The same is also evident if you're looking at the new superheroes when you look at the word Thor. The word Thor spelled backwards is Roth, and Roth in German is red. So these, everywhere you go, you will see that the Neanderthal is actually showing you who he is. And now that he is coming out, showing you scientifically that this is who he is telling you that even if, instead of it being the other way around, dig the psychology, dig the reverse psychology, we know that the black African, what they call the black African, or the Nubanoid, I call the Nubanoid African, the one that the indigenous autochthonous human being was coal black, almost to the point of disappearing at night, with a hue. That's where the hue came in, that radiated hue, that iridescence that the skin gave off in either blue or green tones. This particular human now was the original and is the dominant genetic strand. But then now they're going to reverse the psychology and tell you that if you have any bit of genetics, it's not that you are an African with some Neanderthal genetics based on interbreeding, but that you are a Neanderthal with African genetics. So what they're doing essentially is flipping the script and making you believe that the recessive can now claim dominance and say that you are a Neanderthal by essentially the interbreeding of Neanderthal with the indigenous Africans. So the ones that are in the northern part that they say have been interbred with the Neanderthals, all this being explained about him saying that, you know, those who go back to Africa are still Neanderthals, still not explaining where the Neanderthal originated. If the human is actually originated in Africa, where do you come from? And everywhere he digs on the planet, he still cannot find evidence for his existence.
Well, that might go back to what Honorable Elijah Muhammad spoke about, is that they was made in a laboratory, and by, as we would say, 24 scientists, and that that is where that genetic manipulation actually took place at. And so, I mean, that would account for the fact why they are so interested in, genetics. You don't see, said, the average, black, Moorish person, interested in those types of things. Is always, the promotion of it, as we see within the media, via cartoon, via internet, so forth and so on. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. In fact, I would have to say, and I've said in all of my lectures as well, that Yakub had to be an insane man.
Right.
He was insane. Everybody says, well, he did create a so-called humanoid. The word we have to get to understand, that's what I call him. He says he's human, but I more deal with the word humanoid. The word oid, the word oid is most clearly is mostly connected to who he really is. The word oid is a suffix, and that suffix means resembling something, or having the appearance of, or one that resembles something specified, or something that is specialized quality of something. So if it is a humanoid, it means that if he is saying that the original human, which I call the true man being, the original true man being is actually the original starting point for the humanoid strain, no matter what it took, what variations on the theme it took. If that was the original, and he finds nothing of that in himself, then yes, as they speak about the fact that he may have been grafted, then you have to look at this as the story also, his psychological projection of this particular traumatic event of his creation, or his second creation. This may be why Mary Shelley and all the rest of these people put together these monster movies called Frankenstein.
Right.
And who's Frankenstein? Frankenstein is this entity that was grafted from all these different parts to create this humanoid entity. But then what did this humanoid entity do? It came back and destroyed the village. So essentially, that's essentially what we're facing here today.
Perhaps instead of looking for some hybrid creature out there now, perhaps we are the hybrid creature.